The word Baroque is a jeweler's term, named for a pearl of unusual size. The Baroque period has lots of ornamentation, extravagant like the pearl. A dualism existed, freedom and extravagance versus the strictly organized. The music is extravagant, yet very structured. The two giants of Baroque music were Bach and Handel, and they were examples of strictly organized versus the extravagant in themselves as individuals. Characteristics of Baroque music are unity of mood. You have rhythm that's driving and steady. Melody, you'll hear the opening melody heard again and again. It's long, winding, and expanded. Dynamics, volumes are consistent with abrupt changes. They are terraced. You have sustained, louds, and soft. For texture, it's polyphonic with extensive use of imitation. For harmony, we have basso continuo, and that is an accompaniment played by the keyboard instrument following numbers that specify chords, much like our jazz charts. And word painting continues. Words are frequently emphasized by the extension of many rapid notes. The Baroque orchestra is based on the violin family, and Baroque instrumental music is made up of movements. A movement is a piece that sounds complete in itself, but is part of a larger composition. And instrumental music was performed with a pause between those movements. You'll hear a unity of mood within individual movements, and then they contrast each other. There'll be a regular alternation between a large and a small group of instruments. Your common forms are ternary and binary. Music in the Baroque period was written to order, usually ordered by the nobility for specific occasions. The court music director was in charge of music for the nobility. It was a good job, yet still considered a paid servant position. Having a music director indicated your affluence in the nobility. In church music, it was very elaborate, and this was the only place to hear music for the lower classes. The public opera house was another venue for composers to get paid for their works. An example of instrumental music is a concerto grosso. This is for a small group of soloists and an orchestra. It is a multi-movement work, usually 3 movements, fast, slow, and fast. Instrumental music uses ritornello form very often, and that's frequently found in the first and last movements of the concerto grosso. A theme is repeatedly presented in fragments. You will have a contrast between solo sections and tutti, that's when the orchestra plays together. The fugue comes from fugere and fugare, to flee and to chase. This is a cornerstone of Baroque music. It is a polyphonic composition based on one theme. It can be vocal or instrumental. In the fugue, you have a subject, the main theme. It's presented initially in imitation. Each voice enters after the previous voice has completed presenting the subject. And in a fugue, you have a counter-subject, a different melodic idea. You have episodes. These are transitional sections offering new material or fragments of the subject or the counter-subject. Opera in the Baroque period, started about 1600, is composed for court ceremonies by the in-house composer. This is a display of affluence. Patrons are compared to ancient heroes, and we have the rise of the castrato in opera. Claudio Monteverdi wrote the first great opera. He was an Italian composer of sacred and secular works for the aristocracy. Henry Purcell was a composer also in the Baroque period. He was English. Dido and Aeneas was his greatest opera. In that opera, you have Dido's Lament. It contains a ground bass, which is a repeated musical idea in the bass, also called basso ostinato. Variation form happens in opera. We have repeated musical idea in the bass for 11 times. In Dido and Aeneas, we have descending pitches, which shows how she wants to die. Antonio Vivaldi wrote sacred and secular works. The Four Seasons is one of his most famous. And in his work, The Four Seasons, you can hear a theme returning. Let's look at the giants of Baroque composition. Johann Sebastian Bach wrote more than 1,000 works, including 295 cantatas. His music is still used as a model for polyphonic composition and a model of the structure found in the Baroque period. Let's explore some of Bach's music. He wrote many preludes and fugues. A prelude introduces a fugue. A fugue is a polyphonic composition based on one main theme or a subject. We'll listen and review a prelude and fugue in class. The Baroque suite is an instrumental multi-movement work, a grouping of movements, often called dance suites, but they were written for listening, not dancing. Each movement is usually in binary or A-B form. And of course, Bach wrote in this genre. Bach was a church musician working at a Lutheran church for 27 years. He wrote many cantatas, as I said, incorporating the chorales familiar to the illiterate congregation into those cantatas. A chorale is a hymn tune with German, not Latin, text. A cantata is a religious work using, in Bach's case, the German language, not Latin, that is part of the church service. The church service was a big social event of the week, lasting 4 hours. Music was a large part of that service. Bach wrote cantatas for these church services. A cantata resembles opera in its use of choruses, orchestra, recitatives, and arias, but the difference is that it is for the church service. A cantata contains no costumes or sets. Another genre, the oratorio, started in the Baroque period because of Lent. Opera houses were closed during Lent, so a large vocal work based on a Bible story or text was the next best thing. Listed are the differences between opera and oratorio. George Friedrich Handel was one of the giants of the Baroque period, an example of the freedom and extravagance of the time. A theater man, most of his career was spent as an opera composer, but his most famous work was The Messiah. It is the most performed classical piece ever, usually heard at Christmas time.